Good morning, everyone. Today we'll look at food resources. When we talk about food resources, it's also important to know where it comes from, what is the current scenario of the world. So, before going to the details, we'll just go to a small proverb by Aldo Leopold. There are two spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. One is the danger of supposing that breakfast comes from the grocery, and the other that heat comes from the furnace. With this, I'll start this subtopic. This is a we do have one more resource to go through, that is energy resource. So, in food resources, we'll look at world food problems, changes caused by agriculture and overgrazing, effects of modern agriculture, industrial farming of livestock, and effects on global warming, fertilizer pesticide problems, waterlogging, and salinity. Today, I've actually broken this particular topic into two lectures. So we'll look into the first part, that is world food problems, changes caused by agriculture and overgrazing, and the effects of modern agriculture. Um, in today's topic, we'll look into the rest of the topic in the next class. Okay. So, where do you get your food resources from? Basically, we get our food resources from agriculture, animal husbandry, and fishing. India is supposed to be a self-sufficient in food production. It is only because the modern patterns of agriculture that are unsustainable and which pollute our environment with excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides. So, there are certain terms that we come across in this lecture about food resources. We'll first learn about those things in the next coming 2 3 slides. Okay. So, what is food security and why is it difficult to attain food security? Many people in less developed countries have health problems from not getting enough food, while many people in more developed countries suffer health problems from eating too much. This is the irony of the world. Don't you think so? The greatest obstacles to providing enough food for everyone are poverty, war, bad weather, climate change, and the harmful environmental effects of industrialized food production. Food security is a condition under which all or most of the people in a population have daily access to enough nutritious food to live active and healthy lives. That actually sums up what food security is. More than 1 billion people work in agriculture to grow crops on about 38% of the Earth's ice free land. They produce more than enough food to meet the basic nutritional needs of each and every person on the earth. So, despite this food surplus, somehow one of every six people in the world is not getting enough to eat. These people face food insecurity, living with chronic hunger and poor nutrition, which threatens their ability to lead healthy and productive lives. Now, obstacles to food security. What are the obstacles? I told you earlier poverty, war. Apart from that, you do have corruption, political upheaval, bad weather, such as prolonged drought, flooding, and heat waves, climatic changes. 33% of the calories in food grain production are used to produce meat that many people cannot afford or eat for that matter. 5% are used to produce biofuels for cars. Another 33% is wasted. So each day, there are about 232,000 more people at the world's dinner tables, and many of them will have very little or no food on their plates. By 2050, there will likely be at least 2.6 billion more people to feed. That is the estimated statistics, regarding how many people will be born by 2050. Well, this is before our pandemic. The number could be reduced due to this pandemic because they never kept that particular part in our in these calculations. So a critical question is, how will we feed the projected 9.7 billion people in 2050 without causing serious harm to the environment? That is what we are going to learn in this um, topic about food resources. So many people suffer from chronic hunger and malnutrition. To maintain good health and resist disease, individuals need a fairly good large amounts of macronutrients such as carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and smaller amounts of micronutrients that are vitamins A, B, C, and E, minerals such as iron, iodine, and calcium. People cannot grow or buy enough food to meet their basic energy needs, and they suffer from chronic undernutrition or hunger. Most of the world's hungry people live in low income, less developed countries and typically can afford only a low protein, high carbohydrate, vegetarian diet consisting mainly of grains such as wheat, rice, and corn. People often suffer from chronic malnutrition. Mind you, malnutrition is different from undernutrition. Okay. Malnutrition is a condition in which they do not get enough protein or other key nutrients from the food they eat. So, because of that, it can weaken them, make them vulnerable to disease, and hinder the normal physical and mental development of children. So, according to UN Food and Agricultural Organization, that is FAO, there are about 1 billion chronically undernourished and malnourished people. One in every seven people on the planet are supposed to be undernourished or malnourished. So the FAO estimates that each year nearly 6 million children younger than the age of 5 die from chronic hunger and malnutrition and from increased susceptibility to normally non-fatal infectious diseases like measles and diarrhea because of this weakened condition. So that means it's an average of 11 children per minute dying from these causes, which is not something that we actually think about a medically advanced um, world. So many people do not get enough minerals and vitamins. About 2 million billion people, most of them from less developed countries, suffer from deficiency of one or more vitamins and minerals, usually vitamin E, iron, and iodine. So, in according to WHO, 250,000 children younger than the age of 6, most of them in less developed countries, go blind every year due to the lack of vitamin A. Within a year, more than half of them will die due to various reasons. So, having too little iron, which is the important component of your hemoglobin that transports oxygen in blood, the less amount of iron actually leads to anemia. This causes fatigue, which makes infections more likely and increases women's chances of dying from hemorrhage in childbirth. According to WHO, one of every five people in the world, mostly women and children in less developed countries suffers from iron deficiency. So chemical element iodine is essential for proper functioning of the thyroid gland, which produces hormones that control the body's rate of metabolism. Chronic lack of iodine can cause stunted growth, mental retardation, and the condition called goiter. I'll show a picture of goiter just few moments more. A severely swollen thyroid gland that can lead to deafness. So, according to United Nations, some 600 million people suffer from goiter, and most of them belong to less developed countries. Again, 26 million children suffer from irreversible brain damage every year from lack of iodine. So, the FAO and WHO estimate that eliminating this serious health condition by adding traces of iodine to salt would cost the equivalent of only 2 to 3% per year from every person in the world. So, this is a condition of goiter that I told. In a woman in Niger, West Africa. She suffers from goiter. So, this is the world hunger profile. You can see India being painted as saffron color, right? Which shows 15 to 20, round about 25%. People are suffering from hunger. So, it can be due to variety of reasons because we currently produce enough food to feed the world's population, but almost a billion people are undernourished. Of these who are underfed, 98% live in developing countries. Even in wealthy nations, there are those who do not have access to enough food or to balanced diet. You can also see Pakistan, Mongolia, Kenya, ongoing drought and poor government response. Burundi, wherein you have a civil war ending in 2005, but recovery rate is very slow. So the highest percentage of undernourished people in the world lives there, 67%. You also find South America. Somewhere, some parts of South America come under some amount of the developing nations. The protracted crisis, that is a prolonged ecological or political crisis, seriously affects the well-being of a large number of population having a chronic inability to acquire sufficient food supplies, leading to undernourishment, and it elevates the infant mortality rates and stunted growth in children. Um, not all countries are like India, wherein at least you get some amount of food just by being the citizen of the world, of the country. You get free food to a larger extent. Some economically backward people actually get food for free in certain cases or for very meager sum of amounts through ration shops and stuff like that. Um, no lunches are served free in other countries. So you should know that in Green Revolution, there are certain terms which you should know, which you may come across in the later slides. They are Green Revolution. That's a plant breeding program in the mid 1900s that dramatically increases the crop yields and paved the way for mechanized large scale agriculture. High yield varieties, HYV. They are the strains of staple foods selectively bred to be more productive than their natural counterparts. Then you must be familiar with the term famine. That is a severe shortage of food that leads to widespread hunger. Another thing is industrial agriculture. The farming methods rely on technology, synthetic chemical inputs, and economies of scale to increase productivity and profits. So many people have health problems from eating too much. This I am talking about in the countries which has enough GDP to support the population that they have. Overnutrition. They suffer from something called overnutrition. It occurs when food energy intake exceeds energy utility and causes excess body fat. So too many calories, too little exercise, or both can cause overnutrition. People who are underfed and underweight, and those who are underfed and underweight share, which are who are overfed and overweight, share similar health problems. That is lower life expectancy, greater susceptibility to disease and illness, and lower productivity and life quality. You can hear it from current newspapers. People who normally suffer from ailments due to corona mostly belong to that category. Either their immune systems are compromised by the medications that they take, or else they'll come under these two categories. That is, greater susceptibility to disease and illness. We live in a world where, according to WHO, about 1 billion people face health problems because they do not get enough nutritious food to eat. While you also see 1.6 billion have health problems because they eat too much. So, WHO estimates that obesity contributes to the death of 2.8 million people per year. That is nearly 1 in 5 deaths in the United States from heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and some forms of cancer. Well, India is not far behind in these diseases numbers too. Okay, we are the diabetic capital of the world. So, how is food produced? There are three systems which supply most of the world's food. First one, obviously, agriculture. Croplands that produce grains, primarily rice, wheat, and corn. It provides 77% of the world's food. The rest is provided by rangelands, pastures, and feedlots, which produces meat and meat products. And you also have fisheries and aquaculture, or fish farming, that supply fish and shellfish. So these are the three systems which depend on the small number of plant and animal species. About 2 out of 3 of the world's people survive primarily by eating three grain crops. They are rice, wheat, and corn. Because they cannot afford to eat meat, only a few species of mammals and fish provide most of the world's meat and seafood. Such food specialization actually puts us in a vulnerable position. That is, any of the small amount of crop strains like livestock breeds or fish and shellfish species we depend upon become depleted. Then, as a result of factors such as disease, environmental degradation, and climatic change, this will affect our food habits. So, this violates the biodiversity principle of sustainability. What does biodiversity principle say? It calls for depending on a variety of food resources as an ecological insurance policy for dealing with changes in environmental conditions that have occurred throughout the human history. So it's like no one species. Uh, we should not depend in just one or two species. That is what basically biodiversity principle of sustainability says. So industrialized crop production. This relies on high input monocultures. There are two major types of agriculture: are industrialized agriculture and subsistence agriculture. Industrialized agriculture is high input agriculture, which uses heavy equipment with large amounts of financial capital, fossil fuels, water, commercial inorganic pesticides, and fertilizers to produce single crops or monocultures. For example, paddy field. So, the major goal of industrialized agriculture is to steadily increase each crop's yield, the amount of food produced per unit of land. So, industrialized agriculture is practiced on 25% of all cropland. mostly in developed countries. And it produces about 80% of the world's food. Plantation agriculture is a form of industrial agriculture. You've heard about plantations, right? Rubber plantations, like that, you must have heard. Coffee, tea. We are familiar with these things because Europeans introduced these things to us. They use primarily tropical, less developed countries. So, plantation agriculture is what I am telling. It involves growing cash crops such as bananas, coffee, vegetables, soybeans. They are mostly fed to livestock. Livestock is a normal animals, which we farm animals. Then sugarcane to produce sugar and ethanol fuel, and palm oil to produce cooking oil or biodiesel fuel. These crops are grown on large monoculture plantations, mostly for export to more developed countries. And what does traditional agriculture do? They normally relies on low input polyculture. That is, 20% of the food crops is provided by this traditional way of low input agriculture. Only 75% of its cultivated land, world's food crops follow this particular agriculture. So, traditional subsistence agriculture supplements energy from sun with the labor of humans and draft animals to produce enough crops for a farm family's survival, with little left over to sell or store as a reserve for hard times because they don't use mechanizations. In traditional intensive agriculture, farmers try to obtain higher crop yields by increasing their inputs of human and draft animal labor. Animal manure is utilized as fertilizer, and then we also utilize water. So traditional farmers focus on cultivating a single crop, but many grow several crops on the same plot simultaneously. That practice is called as polyculture. This method relies on solar energy, natural fertilizers such as animal manure. So the various crops mature at different times, providing food throughout the year, keeping the topsoil covered to reduce erosion from wind and water. Polyculture also lessens the need for fertilizer and water because root systems at different depths of the soil will capture the nutrients and moisture efficiently. I'll be talking about the soil, the way composition of soil in a later slide. Probably next class I'll discuss that. Though it doesn't come under your syllabus, you should know when you actually learn about food resources, because without soil you can't have food, right? At least vegetables and fruits, they rely mainly on plant products, mainly on plants, and plants need soil to grow. So polyculture also lessens the need for fertilizer and water because root systems maintain them. uh, Polyculture is an application of the biodiversity principle of sustainability, because crop diversity develops protect it helps in protecting and replenishing the soil, and it reduces the chance of losing most of the year's food supply to pests, bad weather, and other misfortunes, which is commonly a problem with monoculture. Research shows that on an average, low input polyculture produces higher yields than high input industrialized monoculture, using less energy, fewer resources, and providing more food security for small landowners. We in Kerala mostly go via this polyculture method. Polyculture by growing a variety of crops in an inexpensive greenhouses, an application of solar energy and biodiversity principles of sustainability. At the same time, you know that organic agriculture is on the rise. The fastest sector of the US and world economies is organic agriculture, in which crops are grown without the use of synthetic pesticides, synthetic and organic fertilizers, and genetically engineered varieties and animals must be raised on 100% organic feed without the use of antibiotics or growth hormones. This is something that will cost you a little bit more than what you normally spend on buying these products. So, what are the major differences between industrialized agriculture and organic agriculture? In industrialized agriculture, it uses synthetic inorganic fertilizers and sewage sludge to supply plant nutrients, makes use of synthetic chemical pesticides, uses conventional and genetically modified seeds, depends on non renewable fossil fuels, mostly oil and natural gas, produces significant air or water pollution and greenhouse gases, is globally export oriented. It uses antibiotics and growth hormones to produce meat and meat products. Definitely not a sustainable way of agriculture. And what does organic agriculture do? It emphasizes the prevention of soil erosion, uses organic fertilizers such as animal manure and compost, but no sewage sludge to supply plant nutrients. And employs crop rotation is normally utilized, and they use biological pest control, uses no genetically modified seeds, reduces fossil fuel use and increases the use of renewable energy such as solar and wind power for generating electricity. It produces less air and water pollution and greenhouse gases. It is regionally and locally oriented. It uses no antibiotics or growth hormones to produce meat and meat products. So, this is a major, the slide actually tells us about the major differences between these two type of agricultures. So, what are the trade offs of industrial agriculture? What are the drawbacks basically? And the advantages. Advantages: large scale farming, high yields, crops are grown on nutrient poor soil with fertilizers. Crops have fewer blemishes, that is, lots of pesticides are utilized. Crops can be grown in water poor areas with irrigation, which is again a major issue of such type of irrigations creates salinity of soil. Uh, Monocultures are more efficient to grow and harvest. They are less labor intensive. Disadvantages: dependence of mechanization, which is expensive, large quantities of fossil fuels, and they create pollution. Soil quality is degraded, water pollution and scarcity is there. Monocultures are more vulnerable to pests and disease. Toxic residues on food, fewer jobs because they use machines there, decreases the number of family farms, which affects local communities. So, um, next comes crossbreeding in genetic engineering production in new varieties of crops and livestock. For centuries, people have utilized crossbreeding through artificial selection to develop genetically improved varieties of crops and livestock animals. Such selective breeding in the first gene revolution yielded amazing results. So, traditional crossbreeding is normally a slow process. It typically takes 15 years to produce a commercially viable new crop variety if you use the natural way. And it can combine traits only from species that are genetically similar. Typically, resulting varieties remain useful for around 5 to 10 years before pests and diseases reduce their yields. Important advances are still being made with this method. It's more sustainable, but the interesting part is people don't want to wait that long. So they create a second gene revolution by using genetic engineering to develop genetically modified strains of crops and livestock animals. Engineers use a process called gene splicing to alter an organism's genetic material through adding, deleting, and changing segments of their DNA. I have a slide which actually tells this about. So you should know what is genetic splicing. It does not come under your syllabus, but we know that what is genetic engineering and all these things by this. I hope you must have learned it in your biology class. I'm not sure about that, but you better know that at the stage. goal of this process is to add desirable traits or to eliminate undesirable ones by enabling scientists to transfer genes between different species that would not normally interbreed in nature. And such resulting organisms are called genetically modified organisms, which are called GMO. You must have heard of a big uprise of GMO hybrid variety of brinjal and other vegetables, which India did not allow. So, bioengineers hope to develop new GMO varieties which are resistant to heat, cold, drought, insect pests, parasites, viral diseases, herbicides, salty or acidic soil, anything and everything they can take care of. They also hope to develop crop plants that can grow faster and survive with little or no irrigation and with less use of fertilizer and pesticides. Some scientists contend that such innovations hold great promise for helping to improve global food security. Others warn that genetic engineering is not free of drawbacks, which is yet to see in a um, later part of the century because we are currently utilizing them. This is what we do normally in a genetically modified organism. You have a pest killing. This is a particular variety of Bt cells, which is normally produced by pest killing toxins. This gene is responsible for producing the toxin and that is isolated, and many copies of or cloning is done. That is, many copies of this gene is done, and copies of the Bt gene, that is biotechnologically Bacillus thuringiensis. That gene is now BT Valudananga and all. You must have heard it at least in the newspapers. The BT gene is inserted into a small piece of circular DNA called plasmid. And the plasmid containing gene is inserted into the bacterial cells such as uh, certain bacteriums like Argobacterium. It readily enters a plant cell, and this can be used to bypass the plasmid bacteria stage and shoot the genetic material directly to the plant cell. The bacterium delivers the plasmid to the plant cell. The plasmid travels into the plant nucleus and incorporates that particular gene into the plant's DNA, delivering the new gene. It's okay. And the plant cells now grow into plants. And now the Bt gene, which produces the toxins, the seeds from these plants are sold to farmers. So, uh, uh, what does it do? Because the HT herbicide tolerant crops are not killed by the herbicide. So the herbicide can be sprayed on the crop and soil directly. It will not. It will only kill the weeds, not the crop. Examples are bromoxynil tolerant canola and cotton glyphosate tolerant corn, cotton, soybeans, imidazoline resistant wheat. These are all some of this type of genetically modified organisms. Now, Bt crops contain a gene called Bacillus thuringiensis, which naturally occurring bacterium that produces the toxins. So, Bt corn, potatoes, cotton, it's all pretty common. Nutritionally enhanced food. So, genes inserted can increase the amount of particular nutrient and will allow the crop to produce that nutrient which it normally does not produce. The examples are golden rice, which produces more vitamin A than average rice. So, genetically modified animals are being developed in for better food supply. So, Aqua Advantage salmon, which has a faster growth, that's a fish variety. Pigs that produce more omega 3 fatty acids, which is healthy fat. So, they are all typical examples of GMOs. So, what is the controversy over this genetically engineered food? Genetically modified crops and foods. Projected advantages are they may need less fertilizer, pesticides, and water. But the disadvantages have predictable genetical and ecological effects. May have unpredictable. So can be resistant to insects, disease, frost, and drought, which is good. But they may put toxins in food sometimes. It can grow faster. It can promote pesticide resistant insects, herbicide resistant weeds, and plant diseases, which we are unaware of. It may tolerate higher levels of herbicides. It could disrupt seed market and reduce the biodiversity of the particular country wherein it is introduced. So there are limits to expansion of green revolution. That is what we should be looking at. So this is again a GMO trade advantages and disadvantages in this slide. Just go through it. You may find some extra disadvantages and advantages than what we have actually discussed earlier. Okay. And meat consumption, we know that has grown steadily. Meat and animal products such as eggs and milk are sources of high quality protein. And that is the world's second major food producing system. So between 61 and 2012, according to FAO, the production of meat and meat products, mostly beef, pork, poultry, mutton, milk, cheese, and eggs, increased more than twofold, and the average consumption per person of meat and meat products have just doubled. So global meat consumption is likely to double again by 2050 because there's an increase in the rise of and millions of people are rapidly in the developing countries move up the food chain and consume more meat and meat products every year. So the meat, for example, meat consumption in China increased ninefold uh, in 25 years. So um, it is something which is pretty alarming because you need to produce um, to feed these people. About half of world's meat comes from livestock grazing on grass in unfenced rangelands and enclosed pastures. The other half is produced through industrialized factory farm system. So it involves raising higher number of animals which bred to gain weight quickly, mostly in crowded feedlots or in overcrowded pens and cages in huge buildings called concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs. In these facilities, the animals are fed grain, soybeans, fish meal, or fish oil, and some of this feed is doctored with growth hormones and antibiotics, which will accelerate the livestock growth due to overcrowding. Animal waste and runoff from feedlots and CAFOs can have serious impacts on air and water in the surrounding areas. So you can see industrialized beef production, the cattle being grown, and most of them just before being slaughtered. This is a concentrated chicken feeding operation in Iowa. Such operations can house up to 100,000 chickens. Uh, and the industrialized meat production has very harmful health and environmental effects. First, advantages is the increased meat production, obviously. There are high profits, less land use, reduced overgrazing, reduced soil erosion, protection of biodiversity. But at the same time, the disadvantages are pretty high. Animals unnaturally confined and crowded, large inputs of grain, fish meal, water, and fish fossil fuels, greenhouse gas emissions, concentration of animal waste that can pollute water, use of antibiotics. This is the most gravest problem. Without any reason, they are being fed with antibiotics in their food. This can lead to genetic resistance to microbes, and the people who are eating this food definitely will have issues because antibiotics are something they are actually considered as magic bullet. And infections, uh, well, I don't have to tell you about infection, right? We are now facing the pandemic due to a virus. And bacteria is another microorganisms. It's very easy to actually um, expose them to the newer antibiotics being fed to these cattle animals, and that particular variety of microorganism will become resistant to this particular medicine. So the moment it becomes uh, it becomes resistant, and if it actually attacks your body, there is no medicine that can actually help you out to come out of it, and infections, can be fatal. Fish production and shellfish production again have risen dramatically. The world's major food producing system consists of fisheries and aquaculture. Fishery is a concentration of a particular aquatic species, which actually deals with the commercial harvesting in a given ocean area or an inland body of water. Industrial fishing fleets harvest most of the world's marine catch of wild fish using a wide variety of methods. We know that. So, fish and shellfish are produced from aquaculture or fish farming, um, and underwater cages. A lot of people in Kerala actually follow this underwater cages system. Between 1950 and 2012, global seafood production of wild and farmed fish increased ninefold. In 2012, 58% of world's fish and shellfish were caught mostly by industrial fishing fleets, and 42% were produced through aquaculture. So that's world's fastest growing type of food production compared to the other two. In 2011, farm fish production topped beef production, with China accounting for 62% of the world's total. According to 2012 report of World Fisheries by FAO, 87% of world's commercial ocean fisheries are harvested at full capacity, and 57% are overfished 30%. So most of the world's aquaculture involves raising species that feed on algae or other plants, mainly carp in China and India, catfish in United States, tilapia in tilapia is our pilopi. mm, In several countries, shellfish in certain coastal countries. So, farming of meat-eating species such as shrimp, salmon are being grown rapidly, especially in more developed countries. Such species are often fed fish meal or fish oil produced from other fish, and this is a practice that has declined slightly. So, and their waste. So, ultimately, you're eating what they eat, right? What are the trade-offs? That is advantages: high efficiency, high yield. It produces over harvesting, jobs, and then profits. Disadvantages: use of fish oil and fish meal on fish farms depletes wild fisheries. They have large waste output, loss of mangrove forest and estuaries, dense populations vulnerable to disease. And industrialized food production requires huge inputs of energy. The industrialization of food production has been made possible by fossil fuels, right? So it involves huge energy utility. Fossil fuels are used to process food, at the same time transport it to longer distances within and between the countries. Agriculture uses about 20% of the energy utilized in um, United States, where food items travel an average of 2,400 kilometers from farm to plate. That's what they say. So when we consider energy used to grow, store, process, package, transport, refrigerate, and cook all plant and animal food, it takes 10 units of fossil fuel energy to put 1 unit of food energy on the table. That is not something that we should be proud of, because it takes 10 times the fuel energy uh, to put a single ounce of food on your table. According to a um, study led by the ecological economist Peter Tiedemeyers, the world's fishing fleets utilizes 12.5 units of energy to put 1 unit of food energy from seafood on the table. So that's definitely not sustainable. So today's systems of producing, processing, transporting, and preparing food are highly dependent on fossil fuels, and together they result in large net energy loss. So, on the other hand, amount of energy per calorie utilized to produce crops in United States, they have declined by about 50% since 1970s. So the one factor is the decline is the amount of energy used to produce synthetic nitrogen fertilizer has dropped sharply. So another is the rising use of conservation tillage, which sharply reduces the energy use and the harmful environmental effects of plowing. So, what environmental problems does it result from this industrialized food production? Definitely, there are a lot. If you look at it, biodiversity loss, you lose your grasslands, forests, wetlands, and crops to crops or rangeland. Fish kills from mm, pesticide runoff, killing of wild predators to protect livestock, loss of biodiversity replaced by monoculture strains. In case of soil, there will be erosion, loss of fertility, salinization, waterlogging, and desertification. In case of water, aquifer depletion because you need a lot of water to irrigate. Increased runoff, sediment pollution, flooding from cleared land, pollution from pesticides, algal blooms and fish which kills caused of by the runoff of fertilizers and farm waste, air pollution, emissions of greenhouse gases, fossil fuels use, nitrous oxide from inorganic fertilizer use, methane from cattle. Other air pollutants are from fossil fuel use and pesticide sprays. In case of human health, nitrates in drinking water, creating a blue baby syndrome, pesticide residues in water, food, and air. We are definitely being laced by pesticides. Livestock waste in drinking and swimming water, bacterial contamination of meat. So these are some things which we can look at with environmental problems. So this will all lead to natural capital degradation. That is, flowing water from rainfall actually takes away the topsoil. This is a picture from Tennessee. So severe water erosion can cause this sort of big dumps there. So they have serious consequences due to excessive irrigation. Again, severe soil erosion due to grazing uh, of cattle. This lead to the desertification. This is white alkaline salts have displaced crops that once grew heavily in the irrigated land in the United States of Colorado. നേർക്കാഴ്ചകൾ എന്നൊക്കെ പറയില്ലേ അതാണത്. The way we have abused Mother Earth. They are being really, it's really severe in most of the cases. Even though this textbook actually deals with the US, India is definitely in the same ground. So, natural capital degradation. You see the topsoil erosion in India. You see this? This is India, the greener portion. Can you see the topsoil, which is a serious issue? You see Kerala somewhere here, right? I mean, we are in trouble. If you look at the world map, the serious concern. We come under this, the whole Western Ghats belt is in severe problematic area. So we'll talk about the soil and its foundation in the next class. Please read some general topic regarding this particular area and we'll discuss about it in the later classes. Okay.